comparing the supplements that are found in this new Blu-ray presentation in this new set with, say, earlier releases. So let's take the earlier Blu-ray release as an example. So most of the supplements that we have in this new Wong Kar Wai, World of Wong Kar Wai release were found in the earlier Blu-ray set. Just a couple of differences just to keep in mind. First is we have the deleted scenes. Now I mentioned that there are 4 deleted scenes. Those same 4 deleted scenes do occur in the earlier Blu-ray, don't get me wrong, but they're given different titles. So for example, the titles for the deleted scenes for the earlier individual Blu-ray are Room 2046, so that's the same. Postcards, which is different than the title given to the second scene, which is Singapore. And then the 70s, which is the same. And then the 4th is A Last Encounter. And I believe the title given to the new release Blu-ray is Secret Reunion. So same content, but the titles are different for some of the scenes. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, the Tony Raines discussion on the soundtrack, which is included here, is also found, or was also found, on the earlier Blu-ray. However, the earlier Blu-ray also had a separate discussion from Tony Raines on the film itself, and the new Blu-ray does not have such Tony Raines discussion. The Tony Raines discussion on In the Mood for Love is approximately 23 minutes. And so it's a really fascinating discussion. It might be described as being kind of an academic or historical approach and description of the film and background leading up to In the Mood for Love, some details about the production history leading up to In the Mood for Love, and also the content and spirit and thematic concern and discussion about In the Mood for Love that Tony Raines brings to the table so magnificently. So on the one hand, it's one of the great strengths of this earlier individual Blu-ray release, so it's a shame that it's not included on the new World of Wong Kar Wai Blu-ray set. So that's something to keep in mind. However, I can only guess perhaps as to why that early Tony Raines discussion is not included here. Again, this is 100% my speculation, but it's a great discussion. Tony Raines' discussion is excellent. It's 100% excellent. Fantastic. I love it. So please check it out if you can. But there are a couple points where he is very much directly so. He is perhaps somewhat critical of the works Fallen Angels and 2046 and My Blueberry Nights especially. And he's not overly critical, but he does admit that perhaps In the Mood for Love is in many ways a type of peak, if you will, of cinematic excellence. And that seems perhaps the films that he made after, including 2046, maybe don't reach the same level of a type of artistic excellence. And so perhaps some of his comments might be seen to be somewhat critical of, say, 2046. Also, he does mention the idea of the spirit of Wong Kar Wai's cinematic excellence when he made a film like Chungking Express, and how in certain ways that wasn't necessarily repeated in the same successful manner when he made the film Fallen Angels. Again, this is according to Tony Raines, and I'm paraphrasing this, but so his comments, again, not totally negative, but might be seen to be giving a sort of critical eye towards works like Fallen Angels and films that came after In the Mood for Love, such as 2046. And that's very, of course, we have to remember this set includes Fallen Angels and 2046, and so maybe that could be one reason why that Tony Raines discussion isn't included in this new Blu-ray. Again, I'm also speculating. Also, I should point out that around the 50-second mark of the individual release Tony Raines discussion, I think Criterion inserts a picture still of a particular character that is found in a film later called 2046, and this is because Tony Raines at this point talks about the significance of the name Su Jun. And Su Jun, of course, significant for the film Days of Being Wild, and In the Mood for Love, and 2046. Very much so 2046, arguably speaking. So at that particular point in the conversation, Criterion cuts to a picture of one of the actors who appears in 2046. describes in the corner as being Gong Li, but in fact the actor is not Gong Li. The actor is Zhang Zi or Ji Zhang, and so I think there was a little bit of an error. They named the picture of Zi Zhang as being Gong Li, so that's a mistake. And so maybe that could be another reason. I'm not sure. Again, I'm speculating, but maybe those are reasons why it's not included. It also reminds us of the fact that, say, the Tony Raines commentary that was found on the earlier individual release of Chungking Express was not found on the Chungking Express disc that's included as part of World of Wong Kar Wai. So again, I'm speculating as to why that, or maybe this also wasn't included, who knows. But overall, the content of this particular individual discussion from Tony Raines is great, and so it's a shame that it wasn't included. If you were able to check it out, or if you have this individual release, please do check it out if you can. It's really worth it. Also, just to round out the discussion here, the trailers that are found in the individual release are different than the trailer that's found here. Not the restoration trailer that's here, but here we have the trailer and TV spots for Hong Kong, US, and French territories, respectively. So in case you want a different set of trailers, you go for the earlier individual release as well. Then if we were to speak about the earlier DVD 2-disc release, there are some further differences that are worth mentioning, very much so. So on this particular 2-disc set, we don't have, for example, the discussions from Tony Raines about the soundtrack or about the discussion on the film In the Mood for Love, specifically that we had seen in the later Blu-ray release individually. So we don't have that Tony Raines discussion. However, what we did have on the earlier DVD that wasn't carried over into the individual Blu-ray or the World of Wong Kar Wai set, we had some essays that were essentially text that were presented in a slideshow format. Now those texts are really impressive, really impressive, and so it's a shame that those essays aren't carried over into any of the later Blu-ray releases. But those essays are, for example, an essay by Joanna Lee on the music. So that essay is, in essence, what was covered more or less by the Tony Raines discussion later on, but still the Joanna Lee essay is really great, so it's a shame that wasn't included. Also, there's a statement by Michael Galasso, who again is very important in the context of the music of In the Mood for Love, and also we're reminded of his significance from, say, the film Chungking Express as well. And also there's a director's note, and here the director's note makes reference to a summer in Beijing that transformed into what would eventually become In the Mood for Love. And this point also is referred to later on in the Tony Raines discussion and the earlier, in the individual Blu-ray release. So we have those 3 points of essay or writings that were included on the earlier DVD release, but that aren't included in later Blu-rays, unfortunately. Also, we should keep in mind that this DVD also has, or had, another great essay. It's one of the best, and it's by Gina Marchetti. And this is an essay about the historical and societal significance of the film In the Mood for Love. And this essay it's one of the best. And it's, as I say, I really wish that Criterion could have included the Marchetti essay, because it goes into detail about the history, the significance of, say, the end of the 1950s up to the middle of the 1960s, and the idea of the loosening of the border between China and Hong Kong between these periods, in order, therefore, to allow for essentially immigrants from Shanghai into Hong Kong, and how that was very significant in the rapid economic transformation of Hong Kong after the war. And it was so rapid and it was so intense over a short period of time that you had essentially the changing landscape of Hong Kong occurring right before people's eyes. And so this was also very important. Also, Hong Kong emerging on the international scene, a very key economic point. And this is also fueled by, or related to, the movement of people from the mainland into Hong Kong, and these were, for example, when we're talking or thinking about the people from Shanghai, they would usually be very wealthy individuals who would therefore provide, say, sources of investment as well as investment sources from abroad that would lead to the economic transformation, if we will, of Hong Kong during the 1960s. And this is very cool too, because this is reflected in the film in one of the characters, one of the secondary characters, admittedly so, yes, but one of the characters that the Maggie Cheung character works for, and how this character, Mr. Ho, how he is described as involved, his business involved in trade or shipping, and this could be reflective of the nature of the transformation, the economic transformation of Hong Kong that had to do, in large part, with, say, the influx of people from the mainland who would be providing not just investment and money, but also the framework, if you will, for business trading, etc. So, and that's expressed again so brilliantly in the characterization, and as it's shown in The Mood for Love. So, for these and other reasons, I think that essay that we found on the earlier DVD set, it's a real shame that it's not included in any part of this new set, or it wasn't included, in fact, in the later Blu-ray individual release itself either. So it's a real shame, because that's one of the great essays, and we do get a little bit of the historical context in, say, the interview with Wong Kar Wai, but that essay gives us so much, and especially, as I say, for me, I'm not a student or an expert when it comes to Chinese history or the history of Hong Kong, and I don't speak the language or languages. I've never been to these particular parts of the world, and so I don't have this direct connection. I don't know. So these details go way over my head whenever I watch the film, and so I need an essay like this in order to keep me grounded in the context and the significance and what we're seeing. And it reminds me again just how many levels upon which this film is operating. So if you can check out that essay in whatever form you're able to, whether it's this earlier DVD set or whatever, it's totally worth it. And it's so illuminating and eye-opening. It's this text slideshow presentation, so perhaps that's not the ideal situation for a Blu-ray supplement in today's physical media age. I get that, but still, it's so filled with information. It makes it so top-notch. It's one of the best supplements I've ever come across in any Criterion release ever, and it's a real shame that it wasn't carried over. But if you can check it out, please do. The essay, which is included here in The Mood for Love DVD release. So those are the basic similarities and differences when it comes to the supplements, and that's the overview of what we get when we talk about the supplements that are included with the disc that houses In the Mood for Love, in this particular set, World of Wong Kar Wai. And that brings me now to a brief discussion about this new presentation, this restoration, this 4K restoration that this Blu-ray is purported to be based on. And so, as with the other films in this particular set, we have new restorations that are, depending on the film that we're talking about, giving us new details or new presentations or different maybe differences from, say, past releases that we might have otherwise been used to. And that is certainly the case for In the Mood for Love. Now, each film has its own set of, say, differences or presentation issues and the like, and so they're not all equal. And so what we have, or at least what my impression of what we get in this new 4K restoration of In the Mood for Love is, I think, a very interesting set of points that I'll try to express here. So first of all, I'm relying on, say, the earlier release versions from Criterion that I have here. And this is, for example, the Blu-ray is described as being a high-definition digital transfer supervised by director of photography Mark Lee Pingbing. And so this is the version that I was used to, and this is the version that I saw the most of when I rewatched this film. I did see this film, in fact, though, when it was initially released in theaters, and so I wish I had a better recall and memory as to that particular viewing experience in the theater. It was an amazing experience, by the way. But ever since then, I have been more or less used to this Blu-ray release, individual release by Criterion. It's a great release, by the way, but when comparing the earlier individual release with this newer 4K restoration-based Blu-ray release from Criterion now, there are a number of differences. So in terms of visual palette, we have this earlier version that seemed to focus or place a lot of emphasis on the bright red. And so there are certain moments where the reds really popped out. There's a particular scene where you have, I think, an object, a chip on the table that's a red in color. It really was a vibrant red, whereas the reds in the new 4K digital restoration are, I would say, a little bit more subdued, because there is a little bit of it's not strong, but it's a hint of green haze that is applied to the visual presentation for the new 4K digital restoration. So it gives us a little bit of a greenish tint that brings down or subdues the bright reds that we would otherwise have seen in, say, this earlier Criterion individual release. So does that affect the overall presentation? It's not like all the reds are dimmed or subdued. Not on the on the contrary, the colors do also pop out in their own way, but just note that there is a slight difference in that way. It doesn't affect the overall mood of the particular piece, because, at least from my perspective anyway, because it does feel a little bit balanced in the way that, say, some colors don't stand out so strongly versus other colors, for example. And also, it does give us almost subliminal link, if you will, to the way in which we see the color filter, shall we say, applied to the earlier film Days of Being Wild, and also the later film, which we will talk about in a separate video, called 2046. And so perhaps there's a subliminal link that's being made. I don't want to overemphasize that point. It's a very minor point, and perhaps coincidental at best, but still, it makes for a certain sense of consistency, if you will, especially if we recall or consider the ways in which these films are interconnected. Perhaps depending on one's perspective, they are more strongly interconnected, again, depending on one's viewpoint. But in any event, we do get this sense of a slight green that's applied. But to my eye, please note that it wasn't at all distracting. And in fact, it seemed there was a sense of consistency and purpose to it that I found not at all displeasing. It wasn't displeasing to me in the slightest. So that is a general sense of the visual. I should point out, too, that it wasn't true for every particular shot, but there was one shot in particular where it was a profile close-up of Maggie Cheung's face, and from the side. And to my eye, when you had the exact same scene in the earlier Blu-ray release, it seemed, in the new 4K restoration, it seemed to be a little bit cropped, so it was more closed up on her face, just by a little bit, but you could tell by the edges of the frame that it was closer on her face, very slightly, than how it appeared, or how that shot appeared in the earlier individual Blu-ray release. So I thought that was interesting, but it didn't affect my overall impression of that particular moment. I wasn't negatively affected by that particular change, but it was very slight, very subtle, but it's still noticeable, especially if you watch the versions side by side. So that's overall the visual aspect of it. Now, here comes, for me, what was the most striking difference, which is the audio, the sound, the music. Now, it's not true for all the pieces of music. For the most part, the pieces of music that I hear on the new 4K digital restoration are, for the most part, the same in terms of pitch and tempo. So they are the same pitch and the same tempo. If you recall, in our discussion of Chungking Express, there was a little bit of an issue in terms of the note, the pitch of the songs that were used in that film for the 4K digital restoration versus earlier presentations of that film, and there was quite a noticeable jump in pitch in those songs. That's not the case for In the Mood for Love, except for one very key and significant piece of music. Now, if you recall, we were discussing the music by Umebayashi, which is referred to as Yumeji's theme. And Yumeji's theme is referring to a Seijun Suzuki work. And there is a piece of music that's associated with that film that's used in the Mood for Love. It's perhaps considered like the theme song or the iconic work, perhaps the most iconic work of music associated with In the Mood for Love. Now, when you hear that particular piece of music is played over those scenes in the Mood for Love, in, say, earlier versions like this Blu-ray release from Criterion or the earlier DVD presentation from Criterion, it is at a certain note or a certain pitch, and thus it's at a certain tempo. For the 4K digital restoration for this new box set, it is noticeably increased in pitch to a higher note, and it is sped up a little bit. In other words, it is not timed exactly. Here, for lack of a specific, say, musicology term, the song sounds slowed down and at a lower note, whereas in this 4K digital restoration, it sounds a little bit sped up and at a slightly higher note. And you can tell too, when you watch the versions side by side, in fact, there is they don't fall in line. In fact, this goes a little bit longer, and you get a little bit more of the song in the 4K digital restoration than you do in the earlier versions. And so this is slowed down and at a lower note, versus here, which is at a higher note, and you get a little bit more, so it's sped up just a little bit. Now, it is noticeable. It is very noticeable because, again, one gets used to an earlier version of this, which is what I had here. But it seems, again, based on my own, say, limited knowledge, it seems that perhaps this new 4K restoration with this higher pitch and more sped up use of the music of Yumeji's theme, this is probably, to my ears, maybe the more quote-unquote accurate version. And so it might be seen, therefore, as being an improvement. So what do I mean by this? I forgot to mention that the earlier Blu-ray release had a discussion by Tony Raines of the soundtrack, and that soundtrack discussion is also found in the 4K digital restoration Blu-ray from the box set. However, what this new release doesn't have, which the earlier individual release did have as well, was at the end of that you had actually too a playlist of the actual songs that Tony Raines discussed. So Tony Raines has his discussion, and then only for the individual release you had after that a playlist of songs that he then discussed. So in that playlist of songs, you can actually get the playing of Yumeji's theme. And interestingly enough, in this individual Blu-ray release, where you had this playlist, and you had this individual release with the music as it appears in the film of Yumeji's theme at this lower pitch, the playlist supplement has the song at the higher pitch, which matches, to my ear, the high pitch of the song, or the high note of the song that we hear in those same scenes in this 4K digital restoration. So interestingly enough, if one is trying to figure out which pitch is the accurate version, this individual release presents us with a playlist that has the pitch of the song higher than how it appears in the film, at least as far as this earlier Criterion individual release is concerned. So that's one thing to keep in mind, as to suggest that maybe the higher pitch is maybe the more accurate one. Who knows? Another thing to keep in mind is if I have a CD, or I have a separate recording of Yumeji's theme, and that separate recording, again, to my ear, it matches the pitch and speed of the song as we hear it in the new 4K digital restoration versus the earlier individual release. So if we compare it to CD releases, this new 4K digital restoration seems to be more accurate. Also, you can get the film Yumeji on, for example, this Blu-ray, which is from Arrow. And there's a moment where you can hear the song used, or the piece of music used in a key moment of this film. And I listened to it side by side, and in fact, the way you hear it in this film played is at the same pitch, again to my ears, as we hear it in the new 4K digital restoration, which means that this pitch here doesn't quite match the pitch that we saw in the earlier individual release. In other words, it seems like based on all these pieces of evidence, as it were, to my ear, to my amateur ear, it would seem like the speed and pitch and tempo of the song Yumeji's theme as it appears or it's heard in the new 4K digital restoration as it's included in World of Wong Kar Wai is more accurate than what we got on the earlier individual Blu-ray and in fact DVD release. So it's a difference, but perhaps it is seen or can be seen as an improvement, in which case it's a very interesting change indeed. And I really can't say that, I mean, I really didn't notice it necessarily until I heard them side by side. So I don't want to suggest that one is automatically better than the other. If you are used to the older version, that's fine. If you want to listen to the newer version, that's fine. I don't think that either one, there isn't a strong difference between the two, except that they have, if you hear them side by side, you can tell that they have a different speed and pitch. So, but one's ear, at least my ear, does get used to it, whatever version that I do watch. So ultimately, it's a change that is noticeable, but I don't think you will lose out whatever version you were relying upon in the long run, because I think the effect and mood and spirit and purpose of each of these moments of the film where we hear this piece of music, I think is still constant. So we're not losing any of that spirit or emotional edge, that's for sure. But it is a musical and technical difference. That also should be emphasized. So. And then to my, as I say, amateur ear, but based also on this information that I tried to gather, it would seem to me that this new 4K digital restoration is, for my ears, the one that I would prefer. So this is, but again, it depends on your experience, and if you have better trained ears than I, maybe you have a different conclusion. If so, please let me know. But in any event, those are some of the differences, some of the key differences in terms of the new restoration and previous versions. Also, I should mention too that, like with other restorations that we've seen the set, there are some differences too in the credits, the opening credits and the closing credits. In particular, the opening credits here, there's a way in which music is used, the Chinese opera, how it's used in this new version versus how it was or was not used in, say, earlier release versions. So that is also something to keep in mind when trying to track the various differences, the new details that emerge with this 4K digital restoration. So, but I think overall, I am very content with this new presentation. I wasn't displeased, I wasn't distracted, and where I did notice a difference, as I say, with this piece of music, I believe that this new restoration seems to set forth a quote-unquote more accurate speed and pitch of the particular piece of music in question. So in that way, it's and in either way, it doesn't take away from my enjoyment and engagement from the film, which still remains very strong and very much engaged indeed, because it remains a powerful and poignant and beautiful work when seen here or when seen in this particular collection, World of Wong Kar Wai. Okay, so that's it for now in terms of a discussion of this particular set. And so what do you think? What do you think of this particular film? I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. But in any event, my friends, thank you so much for your time. I very much appreciate it. And until we see each other again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it. And stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.